so much. So, obviously, based on the title, this is going to be a holiday true crime video, ASMR true crime video. The true crime cases I'm going to be going over are cases that I found on Reddit, and they are shorter true crime cases than I would normally do. So I'm going to do a few of them in this video. I will preface by saying, for one, I have not investigated these cases. I'm taking them solely from Reddit. I will provide the sources and the links to these cases so you can look into them further, but I have not investigated these myself. These are from Reddit users claiming to be true crime cases, so if anything is incorrect, as usual, please let me know in the comments. Let's get right to it. So this case is posted by the user Anonymous. 19-year-old Rhonda Hinson worked a clerical job at a steel company in Hickory, North Carolina. On the evening of December 22nd, 1981, Rhonda attended a company Christmas party and left with two of her friends. After dropping them off, Rhonda headed for her home in Valdez and wasn't far away when she became the victim of a bizarre homicide. A high-power rifle was used to fire a shot at Rhonda's vehicle from an unknown location. The bullet managed to travel through the trunk and the driver's seat before striking Rhonda in the heart. Her vehicle was found by the side of the road with the driver's door open. Rhonda's body was lying several paces away. The circumstances of how or why she was murdered remain unclear. It's said that Rhonda had been acting strangely towards her parents in the preceding weeks. She dropped hints that she was concealing a terrible secret and made an unusual inquiry to her mother about the appropriateness of dating a married man. On the night of the murder, a motorist drove past Rhonda's car and saw an unidentified man standing next to the driver's side door with Rhonda slumped over the steering wheel. The witness did not know that Rhonda was dead at the time, but he did see a Trans Am parked down the road a short distance away, which may have belonged to the man seen next to Rhonda's vehicle. If this man fired the fatal rifle shot from a distance, why did he approach her car and drag Rhonda's body out onto the road? Was her death an accident or cold-blooded murder? This next case is by Robin Warder 1, or was posted by Robin Warder 1. And this is the 1973 Christmas Eve hit and run death of Kevin Showalter. On Christmas Eve, 1973, 20-year-old college student Kevin Showalter was traveling on Pico Avenue, a residential street in New London, Connecticut. He was inside a car driven by a female acquaintance named Deborah Emilita. The car was forced to pull over after sustaining a flat tire, so Kevin offered to change it. However, while he was crouched down to change the tire on a poorly lit street, Kevin was fatally struck by a passing vehicle in a hit and run at 11:11 p.m. Even though Deborah and several neighborhood residents saw taillights driving away in the distance, none of them caught a good enough glimpse of the vehicle to provide a description. Several weeks after Kevin's death, his mother, Lucille Showalter, showed up station to retrieve his personal effects, but was told they had been lost and that the case would probably never be solved. In response, Lucille spent the next few years relentlessly lobbying for a proper investigation. In 1976, the governor of Connecticut finally ordered a one-man grand jury headed by Superior Court Judge Joseph Danny. Over the course of the next year, the state police would spend over $1 million conducting the most extensive investigation ever performed for a hit-and-run case. They learned that the New London police had botched their investigation by losing key pieces of evidence found at the accident scene, including green automobile putty and amber plastic from a signal light. Even though green paint particles had been found on Kevin's clothing, investigators determined that they likely did not originate from the vehicle which struck him, but were rather planted there. After 5 months of grand jury hearings containing testimony from 107 witnesses, Judge Donahue concluded that the likely driver of the vehicle which struck Kevin was a wealthy, prominent jewelry merchant named Harvey Malove, who also happened to be the former mayor of New London. This decision was based on the fact that Malove had told Lucille Showalter he drove past Kevin's accident scene in his yellow Lincoln Continental at 11:12 p.m., approximately 1 minute after Kevin was killed. Malove had also reported seeing a green car parked at the scene and a middle-aged man talking to a young woman. This story was contradicted by 7 eyewitnesses, including Deborah Emilita, who testified that they never saw Harvey Malove's Lincoln Continental or any green car, and that no vehicles showed up at the scene at all until an ambulance arrived at 11:15 p.m. Even though Judge Donahue ruled that Malove was the probable driver of the hit-and-run vehicle, he did not recommend criminal prosecution since there was no hard evidence to tie him to the scene. Malove maintained his innocence, and another complication ensued in September 1979 when a man named Paul Hanson came forward and confessed to being the driver who struck Kevin. Hanson claimed that after some heavy drinking, he drove home on Pico Avenue on Christmas Eve and recalled feeling an impact of some sort, though he did not notice hitting anyone. When Hanson woke up on Christmas morning, he had no memory of the previous night, but heard a news report about a young man being fatally struck by a vehicle and was horrified to discover some damage on his car. By the time Hanson came forward, the statute of limitations to charge him had expired, but another grand jury investigation concluded there was no evidence to support Hanson's claims that he was the driver. In 2005, Hanson committed suicide and left behind a letter in which he continued to claim responsibility for Kevin's death. The Day of New London newspaper decided to launch a new investigation and attempted to obtain the transcripts from the original grand jury proceedings. These had been sealed from the public since 1978. Even though the transcripts were 12 volumes and over 3,000 pages long, it turned out that they had mysteriously gone missing from the files in New London Superior Court without explanation, and no copies were available. This pretty much brought all attempts to reopen the case to a dead halt, and there are still no conclusive answers about who really hit Kevin Showalter. This is another case by Robin Warder 1, and this is the 1996 Christmas Day disappearance of Patty Vaughan. In October 1996, 32-year-old Patty Vaughan filed for a trial separation from Jerry, or J.R. Vaughan. He was her husband of 11 years. The couple lived in Lavernia, Texas, with their 2 sons and daughter, and J.R. was known to be a rather controlling husband and father. During the separation, J.R. moved into an apartment in San Antonio while Patty remained in their house with the kids. Patty soon became romantically involved with a former boyfriend named Gary, whom she introduced to her family at a Christmas Eve gathering. On Christmas Day, J.R. was scheduled to visit Patty at home to have Christmas dinner with their kids before she took them to her cousin's house that night. However, Patty never showed up and did not phone her cousin to let her know she wasn't coming. The last person to speak with Patty was her sister, who phoned on Christmas morning. She says that J.R. had answered the phone, and when Patty spoke, she apparently sounded like she had been crying. At around 1:30 p.m. on December 26th, Patty's boss discovered her abandoned van by the side of the road with a flat tire on Texas State Highway Loop 1604. This location was approximately 15 miles from Patty's house and 5 miles from her workplace. Patty's boss and co-workers had passed by that location earlier that morning, but claimed the van was not parked there at that time. J.R. would claim that he spent most of Christmas Day fighting with Patty over her relationship with her new boyfriend. J.R.'s sister Marilyn was scheduled to join them for Christmas dinner, but when Marilyn arrived, J.R. told her that Patty was inside the bedroom and didn't want to talk to anyone because she wasn't feeling well. He had asked Marilyn to take the 3 children to a relative's house for Christmas dinner. After the kids left, J.R. said that he got into another heated argument with Patty before she stormed out of the house sometime after 6:30 p.m. and drove away in her van. She evidently never returned. J.R. raised eyebrows by filing for divorce from Patty the day after she went missing and immediately moving back into the house. A forensic examination was performed on Patty's van and found traces of blood. It was apparent that someone had recently shampooed the carpeting. There were no puncture marks in the flat tire, which had been deflated intentionally. A red workman's jumpsuit with an emblem containing the letters J.M. was also found inside the van. A forensic search of Patty's house found traces of blood in the bedroom and bathroom. Luminol testing picked up swipe marks on the bedroom floor, and there were minute traces of blood inside a mop and bucket in the garage. Surprisingly, J.R. and his sister Marilyn were allowed to stay in the house while it was being searched, and Marilyn often disrupted the evidence technicians. When investigators wanted to get blood samples from J.R. and his children, J.R. initially refused and only consented after a search warrant was obtained. The DNA tests would prove that the blood found in the van and house belonged to Patty. J.R. eventually stopped cooperating with the investigation and refused to allow his children to be questioned. By contrast, Patty's new boyfriend, Gary, had a solid alibi to account for his whereabouts on Christmas Day, and he was very cooperative and active in their search efforts, so he was never considered a serious suspect. At the time, JR was a building contractor working on the construction of an elementary school in Pleasanton. Rumors started circulating that he may have encased Patty's body inside the school's concrete foundation, but multiple searches of the school have turned up no evidence to support this, and records showed the concrete was poured 4 days before Patty went missing. In 2012, new DNA testing was performed on some undisclosed items found in Patty's van and uncovered traces of female DNA which did not belong to Patty or anyone related to her. One of the investigators stated that he believed he knew who this female DNA might belong to, but without probable cause was unable to obtain DNA samples from that person. While police consider JR to be the primary person of interest, they also believe at least 3 other people may have helped him cover up the crime, but no one else has been publicly named. JR eventually moved to Colorado with the 3 children and currently resides in Idaho under a different name. The children are completely estranged from Patty's side of the family and have had no contact with them since she went missing. Okay, this next story, or this next case rather, is by the Reddit user Badly Drawn Girl, BADLYDRAWNGRRL. Nicole Betterson seemingly ceased to exist sometime around Christmas 1977 at the age of 2. Nicole's mother had died earlier that year in a violent car crash. It was Labor Day weekend, and the father, Jared, was behind the wheel when he lost control. They flipped several times, and Susan Betterson was ejected from the vehicle and killed. Jared and his daughter were miraculously not seriously hurt. Police found marijuana in the car, but because they cocked up the investigation in some way, they never ended up filing charges against Jared. By December, he had already remarried to a woman named Barbara, and a few days before Christmas, he took his daughter to visit her granddaughter, which was his late wife's mother and father. There he announced that he was moving his family from Dearborn to some vague destination out west. No one ever really found out what he'd meant by west. Some people were told they were headed to Vegas, others heard California. Jared hadn't had the greatest relationship with Susan's parents. He claimed it was because he was black. They claimed it was because he'd introduced Susan to drugs. So it wasn't super unusual for him to be unforthcoming with them. They said goodbye to their granddaughter, and the family packed up and left town soon after. Decades passed. No one heard from the couple or their young daughter. Eventually, almost 20 years later, Susan's parents decided to try and locate their granddaughter, who at that point was their only living heir. Nobody could figure out where the Bettersons were. Finally, a private investigator managed to track down Jared and Barbara. They were living in a sad, run-down little apartment in the desolate outskirts of Las Vegas. But Nikole was not with them. She didn't seem to be anywhere, actually. The PI tried searching the DMV, local school reports, family court archives, pediatricians, even police records. She didn't even seem to have an official birth date. At some point after that last existence. The sad and final twist to this already sad story is an attempt to bluff Jared Betterson into talking. In an attempt to bluff Jared Betterson into talking, a Vegas detective knocked on the door to the tiny apartment and told Jared, "I know what happened to your daughter. It will be easier on you if you tell us the whole story." They didn't, obviously, but Jared didn't know that. He told the detective to come back in a week and that he would arrange for investigators to meet and speak with Nikole. Several weeks went by and he kept procrastinating and asking for more time to set up the meeting. Then suddenly the Bettersons stopped answering the phone. Their front door was wallpapered in eviction notices by the time police arrived to investigate. Both Jared and Barbara had been dead inside their apartment for several weeks. Jared had shot his wife twice in the chest before putting the gun to his own head. Barbara was holding a Bible and a wilted red rose. Prior to committing suicide, she had mailed a painstakingly handwritten letter to Jared's parents, stating that by the time you get this, we should be dead. Jared is about to go to jail, and I don't want to live without him. I'm sorry about living apart from our family. I'm sorry about so many things. We've had a sad and difficult life. Go to your Bibles to see peace, and please forgive us for all the wounds we have put in your hearts with our tragic and youthful blunders. Enclosed was a money order for $900, which they had saved gradually over an extended period of time to cover the costs of their cremations. In the letter, they asked for their ashes to be placed in the same urn. Makes you wonder what they did to that poor little girl, what actually happened to her. And that's horrible to think that that family will never know and never get justice for that. Okay, so this case is a rather long one and is going to be the last case that I go over in today's video. And this is by an anonymous user. On the afternoon of December 25th, 1985, Debbie Wolfe finished her shift as a nurse at the Veterans Hospital in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and left to, presumably, drive home to her small, isolated cabin located 4 miles outside in Fayetteville. It is unclear if she ever arrived. When the usually punctual Debbie did not show up for work the following morning for her 8 a.m. shift, and phone calls to her went unanswered, her mother, Jenny Edwards, became concerned and drove to the cabin along with a family friend. When Jenny Edwards and Kevin Gordon arrived at the cabin, things just didn't seem right. They seemed out of place. Beer cans were lying in the yard, the dogs had not been fed, and Debbie's nursing uniform was lying on the floor in the kitchen. There were other personal items scattered on the floor. Something was not right here, they thought. Looking around the bedroom, Kevin Gordon found Debbie's purse shoved under her bed. It was not in its usual location. Her mother found the state of Debbie's home worrying, as Debbie usually kept a tidy house and took good care of her dogs, and became even more concerned after checking Debbie's answering machine. What they heard was a stranger's voice on the tape. The two then really became concerned. The message had been left earlier that day. The voice was a man calling from the Veterans Hospital to see how Debbie was doing. The man's message indicated that Debbie had missed many days of work. as odd because she knew this was not true. At the time the message was left, Debbie had not missed days of work, only a few hours at best. After a search around the cabin and a nearby pond produced no signs of Debbie, her mother contacted the sheriff's office. Jenny and Kevin expanded their search for Debbie outside the cabin to a nearby pond. They did not find Debbie. Becoming even more concerned, Jenny called the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department. Responding to the call was Captain Jack Watts of the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office. After arriving, Captain Watts was under the assumption that Jenny and Kevin had already searched the pond, so no official request was made that day for divers. The search that Miss Edwards and Kevin had done was only a cursory one. They were not equipped to search in the water. Bloodhounds were brought to the cabin, but they couldn't find anything. According to Captain Jack Watts of the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department, I think it was mentioned that they had already looked in the pond. There was no use for us to look in the pond, so I don't think we did a dive of the pond or a complete search of the pond on that day. No, we did not. Dissatisfied with the police department's efforts, Jenny hired her own divers to search the pond. Can I just say that that's so weird that investigators didn't search the pond? How would two people search a pond by themselves? Or how would they have the equipment to search a pond for bodies? Like, that seems completely idiotic that they wouldn't search it themselves. So dissatisfied with the police department's efforts, Jenny hired her own divers to search the pond. In the freezing weather on January 1st, 1986, Kevin Gordon and his friend Gordon Childress entered the pond, searching for any sign of Debbie Wolfe. Both men were familiar with rescue work. Childress looked for any evidence. Soon after the dive started, Childress found 2 sets of foot impressions pressed into the thick mud along with what appeared to be drag marks. 2 minutes later, after entering the murky water, Gordon Childress came across a body. Debbie's body was found about 30 feet from the bank in 5.5 feet of water. According to Childress, it was inside of what looked like a burn barrel. That's a rusty 55-gallon oil drum type thing with holes in it. The body was identified as Debbie Wolfe and an autopsy was conducted. The autopsy on Miss Wolfe was performed by Dr. William Oliver on January 2nd, 1986. Dr. Oliver worked for the North Carolina Medical Examiner's Office. Interestingly, the manner of death was reported as undetermined. The medical examiner could not determine if the drowning was an accident or a homicide. Often in suspicious deaths, investigators look to other factors to help them conclude if a death was an accident or a murder. Clues found both in the cabin, outside, and on Debbie's body should have suggested to investigators that they were dealing with a murder. Findings from the autopsy should have also raised flags about Debbie's death. First, she had multiple abrasions on several of her fingers. These could have been defensive wounds. It is reasonable to conclude that in typical drowning situations, the deceased's eyes and mouth would be open along with their hands and arms in a clawed position as though they were fighting for their life. However, Debbie's eyes and mouth were closed and her body appeared as though she was in a relaxed state. Also, in a typical drowning case, the deceased would have a white froth or foam-like substance in their No froth or foam substances were found on or in Miss Wolfe's mouth or airways. The presence of either froth or foam is a vital phenomenon and often indicates that the victim was alive at the time of submersion. Was Debbie unconscious prior to entering the pond? The autopsy found only a half teaspoon of water in Wolfe's upper bronchial area. Despite the autopsy's findings, the sheriff's office did not believe that she had been murdered and instead proposed that Debbie had drowned after accidentally falling into the pond. Her dogs were running loose when the family members and the sheriff's department first met over near the pond. Possibly she was playing with the dogs and fell in. As the investigation continued, the police denied that Debbie's body had been found inside a barrel, instead claiming that what appeared to be a barrel to some of the divers could have been Debbie's jacket, which may have been ballooned out as she was laying at the angle in the bottom of the pond. However, according to Jenny, I asked one of our friends who was there, I said, "What happened? Do they have the barrel?" And they said, "No, they decided to leave it there. They'll get it in the morning." The next day they went back to get the barrel and they said that the barrel was gone. All of a sudden it didn't exist, the same barrel that had been there the night before. Jenny recalled a barrel that sat outside Debbie's cabin that was used to store firewood. When she later went to look for it, she discovered the barrel was gone and had left behind an indentation mark on the ground where it had been. Despite the investigators' denial, one of the divers insisted the barrel existed. He says, "There was no doubt in my mind. I'm 100% positive that it was an old burn barrel or something of that nature. You know, metal, rusted, 55-gallon type drum that the body was in." 2 months later, Jenny was giving the clothing that Debbie was wearing when her body was recovered. When she inspected them, she became convinced that the clothing did not belong to her daughter due to the following inconsistencies. The brown corduroy pants were too big, too long, and unzipped. The bra cup sizes was 3 sizes too large, and around 3 cup sizes too large, and around it was 2 sizes too large for the waist size. Debbie was found wearing a size 38C, but she wore a 34B. Sorry, the way that was written was strange. So Debbie was found wearing a size 38C, but Debbie wore a size 34B. The Nike shoes were 3 sizes too large and were men's shoes. She was found wearing men's size 6, whereas Debbie wore a ladies' size 7. When Debbie was found, she had on a new regulation Army field jacket that did not belong to Debbie or anyone associated with her. The jacket had no name tag and no way to retrace its original owner. When she was found, she was also wearing a black t-shirt with Pittsburgh Steelers on the front. Debbie's family or her boyfriend could not identify the shirt, claiming they had no idea where it came from. Additionally, a family friend, Franz Schwaff, who had gone to the cabin to feed Debbie's dogs, found Debbie's wool stocking cap in mud at the opposite end of the pond from the location where she was thought to have entered the water. The family thought this was odd because there was a thin layer of ice on the pond and it was unlikely that the cap could have floated to the other side. Miss Edwards also found it odd that when the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation returned the white Nike tennis shoes to her, they had no mud on them. She inquired to the SBI and they insisted that the shoes had not strange message on her answering machine was involved. There was a volunteer at the hospital that wanted to become romantically involved with Debbie. Debbie discussed this with everyone, including him, and told him that she would be his friend, but nothing else. He was investigated by the sheriff's department the night that the body was brought to the surface. However, he provided an alibi and refused to take a polygraph test, so he wasn't questioned any longer. He left several days after that to go out of state. Captain Watts claimed the man provided no useful information during his interview. Anyone that the family requested that we talk to or interview, we tried to interview. Of course, through the information we received through these interviews, there was nothing there that we could use in any criminal prosecution, or there was nothing there that would indicate to us that this was a homicide. Debbie's mother continues to believe that her daughter was murdered and searches for answers until her own death. There are people out there who know what happened to Debbie, and I'm hoping that they will come forward and finally say something. She was loved by very, very many people, and I think that she has a right to be put to rest, finally, and I'd like to do that. So it says this write-up, a separate version of the Examiner article linked below, includes a potentially promising development. However, I have not been able to find the information corroborated anywhere else online, and the article is clearly biased, so take it with a grain of salt. And it says, newly discovered information by Dr. Godwin from the case files suggested that semen was present in the victim. Was she raped before she was murdered? DNA profiling was not available in 1985, and it seems that a new private investigation is ongoing by Dr. Maurice Godwin. Okay, so those were the few